Hey guys, welcome back to Planet Mithril. My name is Mithril, and today I'm probably finishing off my foray into the northern kingdoms of Arnor with my take on Malbeth the Seer. The wizard, not quite wizard, who helps bolster the armies of Arnor and is ever loyal at present among his counterpart and liege lord, King Arnor himself. I'm going to be balancing some different tones today, with green once again taking up the bulk of the Arnor model as they tend to do, but balancing the usual rich green with a more desaturated, almost minty tone. Once my Malbeth was cleaned up and mould line cleaned, I've assembled him using superglue to the base, and I'll be working my Malbeth off a black undercoat which I've applied using Citadel Chaos Black Spray. I'm really excited to get Malbeth on the channel so all your forces of Arnor have all their commanders available ready to fight. Brushes ready guys, let's get painting. All the skin, I'm giving a base coat with a 4:1 mix of Bugman's Glow and Mechanicus Standard Grey. The addition of Mechanicus here will inlay a slightly leathery aged tone to the skin, which I can build off later on. His hair and scraggly little goatee are giving a base coat now using pure Mechanicus Standard Grey. The inner robes and Malbeth sleeves I'm base coating now with a 1:1 mix of Auroch Flesh and Deathguard Green. This will need a few passes with thinner coats to get a smooth finish. His outer robes now I'm base coating with a 1:1 mix of Caliban Green and Warpstone Glow. These will be mirroring more the standard greens of the Kingdom of Arnor. Finally, his boots I'm picking out using Dryad Bark. Now as Malbeth has probably been around for a little while, I want to give his skin a little bit more of a washed out tone to that of a younger, more sprightly man. I'm beginning Malbeth's skin by shading his entire head and hands with Reikland Flesh Shade, thinned down with Lamia Medium. With this dry, I'm beginning to layer up his skin and hands by adding Encadian Flesh Tone to the slightly leathery base mix, framing the shape of his bald head and marking out his facial details around his goatee. Slowly building up the concentration of Cadian Flesh Tone until I'm at a stage where I'm layering over using pure Cadian Flesh Tone. Here, you should just be starting to define the more prominent areas of his face, namely his weary eyes, brow line, and framing the shape of his scalp. I'll be applying more interim highlights here with the lighter, more desaturated tones to accentuate his aged and slightly drawn wizardy skin. Working my way up to a final edge highlight. By keeping my highlights tight and thin here, I'll make sure this looks as natural as possible. I'm looking to just accentuate the highest points of facial detail and the tension points across his hands and fingers. The eye recesses I'm painting in using Abaddon Black, and finishing off using 2 dots of Pallid Witch Flesh. The hair and beard I'm giving an all-over shade using some fairly heavily diluted Nuln oil, making sure I work this into as many of the recesses as I can for equal shade coverage. When this is thoroughly dry, I'm defining the structure of all the hair now by layering over using Dawnstone, the next paint progression up from Mechanicus. As you can see, I'm defining the individual hairs as much as I can to get some initial texture into these areas at an early stage. I'm building up the highlights now with a 2-to-1 mix of Mechanicus Standard Grey and Ulthuan Grey, further defining the texture of the hair as I continue to add Ulthuan, drawing this more towards the scalp and tips as well as the outer curls of hair, building up the blend slowly as I progress. Working this up to a final extreme edge highlight over the tips and most prominent areas of hair using pure Ulthuan Grey, giving a good point to my brush to make sure I'm as precise as I can be. Now you can see Malbeth sports not just one Arnor green, but two. A distinctly minty paler green, which sits within the bolder, richer colours of the more standard Arnor robes. This is super eye-catching, but balancing the two can be quite difficult, as they're quite disparate greens, and without the right recipe, it can be a little bit challenging. But don't worry, I've got you covered. Before I do anything here, I'm applying a shade to the inner robes using Croak Green. This is quite flat textured, so I'm working extra hard to try and manoeuvre this where I need the shade to be. I'm starting from the inner robes and working my way out, as the darker greens are slightly easier to work with, so there's less risk of blemishes. The initial layers I'm blocking in now using a 1-to-1 mix of Deathguard Green and Scarstick Green. Scarstick is a super bright paint, so you may not think this will work too well with the more earthy tone of Deathguard. Trust me though, it's all good. With my blocking layer in place, I'm going to start further defining the flow and texture of the robes now by adding a small amount of Screaming Skull into the mix. This will bounce off the tone of the Scarstick and desaturate the vibrancy slightly, giving me that slight mintiness which I want. Working my way up from a 4-to-1 initial ratio mix, I'm gradually increasing the concentration of Screaming Skull in the overall mix until I have a mix which is quite a high concentration of Screaming Skull comparatively. This will be quite bright and stark, so for the edge highlights you want to be as controlled as you possibly can be, looking more to frame the flat shape of the cloak and just defining further any recessed folds. With the outer robes, I'm going to be following a similar recipe to that of the other Arnoria models I've already painted. This will just help Malbeth maintain coherency with the rest of the army while sporting his wizardy, seery ways. The outer robe is being given an initial shade using Biel-Tan Green. Thankfully this cloth is more defined than the inner robe, so working this into the shades will be much easier. The blocking layer I'm applying now with a 2-to-1 mix of Warpstone Glow and Caliburn Green, leaving the Biel-Tan shade showing in the recesses as best I can. picking up the larger fold running down his back and particularly around where his staff presses in against his waist. After a few layers, adding in more warpstone glow, my first actual highlight I'm applying with pure warpstone glow. Again, as with the inner robes, defining the flow and texture of the cloak. For the upper highlights now, I'm adding in Nurgling green to the warpstone, making sure to define as best I can the framework, the upper folds of the cloak to really give it a sense of realism and natural movement. You can add as much or as little Nurgling as you wish depending on how bright you want these highlights to be. As you can see, the characteristic green of Arnor shining through now. Now that I've finished with the robes, I can finally base coat the belt around his midsection using dried bark, but be careful not to bleed out onto the finished robes. The belt and boots are now being given a layer using Gorthor brown, framing the shape of the boot and outlining the straps. The final edge highlight is now being applied using Baneblade brown. The fastenings over Malbeth's chest and the embroidering on the neckline I'm very carefully picking out using Skull Crusher brass. Then giving these a targeted shade using Agrak's Earthshade. And just defining the lining of the golds now using Canoptek Alloy. Malbeth's staff I'm now base coating using Ulthuan Grey. As this is over a black undercoat, you will undoubtedly need several thinner coats to get a smooth, sleek finish, but not thin enough that it runs over onto the finished robes. A subtle wood grain texture is now being built into the staff shaft using pure white scarf, thin lines down the length of the wood to give it some texture and make it appear as nice white wood. The gem in the head of the staff I'm picking out now using Mephiston Red, framing the outer edges of the gem now using Troll Slayer Orange. And finally a dot of white scar just to give it a glint of reflection. One of King Ardavui's most trusted and long-time friends is now finished. The Seer himself, Malbeth, in his wizardry, not quite wizard look, doing what he can to help bolster and protect the kingdom and people of Arnor at the behest of his king. For basing, please head over and check out my 5-minute bases playlist. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Please remember to like, subscribe and comment, and don't forget to hit that bell for video notification. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, take care and happy hobbying. Bye guys.